I say, the more my work gets done. 'Cause I live and breathe this Philadelphia freedom. From the day that I was born, I waved the flag. Philadelphia freedom took me knee-high to a man. Yeah, give me a piece of mind my daddy never had.
All right, and welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to get into the final segment for the week, and we are going to be talking about the South Philadelphia Mafia and the street politics that consume them. It's a little long-winded, but we're going to try to get through it, and hopefully you guys learn something from it. So organized crime in Philadelphia, particularly in South Philly neighborhoods, it really represents a long, complex, and dynamic nexus of mafia syndicates, street gangs, and local politics. And while popular culture often focuses on cinematic depictions of mob bosses and dramatic mob hits, the reality is that it encompasses decades of evolving criminal influence, neighborhood power dynamics, and interaction with political machines and urban street politics. And we're going to sort of explore the origin, the structure, and the street level influences and political entanglements of the South Philadelphia Mafia and associated crews. And so we have to look first at the historical foundations of organized crime in Philly. And activity in Philadelphia really stretches back into the 19th century, rooted in multi-ethnic working-class neighborhoods where poverty, segregation, and limited economic opportunity fostered street gangs and underground economies. And before the rise of the Sicilian Mafia influence, Irish and Jewish gangs dominated the underworld from the early 1900s into Prohibition, engaging in petty crime, waterfront violence, and later bootlegging and vice operations. And the modern Italian-American presence, often referred to colloquially as the South Philadelphia Mafia, solidified in the mid-20th century under figures like Angelo Bruno, who became the preeminent boss of the Philadelphia mob in '59. Under Bruno, the Mafia established strong rackets in gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and took advantage of the legalized gambling boom in Atlantic City in the late 70s. However, this era of relative organizational cohesion eventually gives way to internal violence and leadership feuds, most notably during the 80s and early 90s, most notably Nicky Scarfo and that whole entire era, and the subsequent mob war between Sicilian-aligned boss John Stampa and South Philadelphia corner boys led by Joey Merlino illustrate how street politics, bonding among neighborhood cohorts, and resentment toward traditional boss structures reshaped the mafia power. So the Philadelphia mob operates just like any other Cosa Nostra group, with a hierarchical structure comprising of a boss and underboss, consigliere, and crews of captains and soldiers. And over the past decades, federal prosecutions, including major RICO indictments, have disrupted that hierarchy, weakening centralized authority and pushing some of those activities into looser, decentralized formats. So the typical organized crime enterprise has always sort of included racketeering, gambling, and loan sharking, often embedded in local bars, social clubs, and taverns. Then there's extortion and illegal gambling, including attempts to tax or control street-level sports betting and numbers running. Then there's drug trafficking, particularly as mafia crews competed or collaborated with street crews and other syndicates. And then there's the whole street politics of it all. The networks and loyalties forged on neighborhood corners, bars, social venues have shaped how mafia figures recruit, enforce, discipline, and interact with non-mafia street crews. So while the mafia has historically exerted broader regional control, street crews in South Philadelphia serve as a granular expression of organized crime politics at the neighborhood level. The 10th and Oregon crew, and that's a prominent example of a group that was formed around the intersection that gives it its name. The crew emerged in the 60s as a street-level organization involved in drug trafficking, gambling, extortion, and loan sharking, and over time it both allied with and feuded against parts of the mob, illustrating shifting alliances between neighborhood operators and traditional syndicate hierarchies. So the 10th and Oregon crew's interaction with other crews, including violent conflicts with 12th and Wharton street gangs, and its attempts to negotiate peace under mob auspices, demonstrate how street politics, local reputation, and territorial control can drive criminal strategy as much as a formal mafia order. And, the thing about Philadelphia that makes them a little different is their underworld was never exclusively Italian. The Black Mafia, also known as the Philadelphia Black Mafia or the Black Muslim Mafia, emerged in the late 60s and became a powerful organized crime syndicate in its own right in African-American neighborhoods. Although distinct from Cosa Nostra, it engaged in many of the same exact activities: extortion, racketeering, numbers running, and drug trafficking, and developed relationships with local political figures and institutions. Similarly, diverse groups as the Irish American crews and other ethnic street gangs influence local turf disputes and relationship dynamics within the mafia, exemplifying the multi-layered nature of the South Philadelphia mob and South Philadelphia street politics. So, organized crime influences politics through a blend of, informal negotiations, intimidation, patronage networks, and mutual benefit arrangements. Philadelphia historically featured powerful ward organizations and political machines where figures like Frank Palumbo, an entrepreneur and racketeer with unofficial political influence, operated as fixers, connecting local politicians to neighborhood interests, and sometimes serving as middlemen between illicit and legitimate spheres. While direct evidence of the mafia control over mainstream political offices in modern Philadelphia remains limited, organized crime has benefited historically from local corruption, including police complicity, union infiltration, political patronage networks that could shield or facilitate rackets. Academic studies really underscore how organized crime often thrives where local government, law enforcement, and economic forces tolerate vice activities in exchange for stability or indirect benefits. Studies of urban crime and political corruption note that organized crime's persistence is often tied to broader governance dynamics where political machines, bureaucratic tolerance, and economic marginalization create environments in which these illicit networks do flourish. Philadelphia, like other major American cities, experienced periods where crime groups and political interests intersect through patronage, influence peddling, and exploitation of weak regulatory oversight. And the conclusion to all of that is that the South Philadelphia Mafia, anchored in the Italian-American Philadelphia crime family, represents just one thread in the city's broader tapestry of organized crime, street crews, and tangled relationships with local politics. While Hollywood is often focused on dramatic mob bosses and sensational violence, the real story lies in decades of neighborhood interplay between mafia hierarchy, street-level crews, and political networks. And over time, prosecutions under RICO and internal feuding diminished centralized mafia power, but localized street politics, alliances, feuds, and neighborhood reputation continue to shape the underworld in Philadelphia. Furthermore, multi-ethnic crime syndicates such as the Black Mafia or the Irish American crews highlight Philadelphia's organized crime landscape and has always been very diverse, deeply embedded in community structures, and inseparable from the city's political evolution. So, organized crime in Philadelphia represents one of the most volatile and factionalized underworld histories in the United States. Unlike some mafia families known for long-standing stability, Philadelphia's syndicate has been defined by cycles of strong leadership, catastrophic mismanagement, internal coups, and bloody wars. And we're going to examine the evolution of organized crime in Philadelphia through its bosses, comparing successful rulers with failed ones, and analyzing how internal conflicts and shifting street politics shape the family's rise, decline, and survival. So, Philadelphia's criminal underworld really actually predates the modern mafia. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, Irish, Jewish, and Italian gangs competed for control of gambling, loan sharking rackets, labor racketeering, and waterfront theft. And by the mid-20th century, Italian-American organized crime consolidated power, eventually forming a structured mafia family aligned with the National La Cosa Nostra Commission. And the city's geography and culture played a huge role in all of this. Tight-knit row house neighborhoods fostered loyalty, secrecy, and multi-generational criminal ties. Street corners, social clubs, and local bars functioned as informal headquarters where alliances were built and disputes got handled or settled. And those neighborhood dynamics, often called street politics, would later influence power struggles inside the mafia itself. So when we look at the model of stability, we're really talking about Angelo Bruno, because the most successful boss in Philadelphia's history really was Angelo Bruno, who ruled from 1959 until his assassination in 1980. Nicknamed the Gentle Don, Bruno emphasized diplomacy, discretion, and profit over violence. He maintained strong ties with other mafia families and avoided those unnecessary attention-grabbing moments from law enforcement. And traits of that success included preference for negotiation rather than bloodshed, strict discipline among subordinates, strategic alliances outside of Philadelphia, and avoidance of flashy crimes that attract federal scrutiny. Under Bruno, the family prospered through gambling, loan sharking, and union infiltration, including ventures tied to the casino boom in Atlantic City. And that era demonstrates a key principle, especially in organized crime. Stability often depends more on restraint than aggression. I'll say it again because it's important. Stability depends on restraint, more restraint than aggression. Then you have the collapse of stability. Enter Nicky Scarfo. Because after Bruno's murder, a succession crisis destabilized the organization. The eventual victor, Nicodemo Scarfo, became one of the most feared and destructive bosses in Philadelphia's history. Nicky ruled through paranoia and violence, ordering numerous murders to eliminate perceived threats. And while fear initially consolidated his power, Scarfo's leadership exposed the organization to unprecedented law enforcement attention. His regime illustrates how authoritarian leadership can weaken a criminal organization. And that was brought about by excessive violence, which attracted federal investigations. Members turned informant rather to avoid prison or execution. Internal trust eroded completely, and alliances within other families would deteriorate. And Scarfo's eventual conviction and imprisonment left the family fractured and vulnerable, setting the stage for even more conflicts. Excuse me. So we look at the Civil War and the generational conflict, John Stanfa versus Joey Merlino. After Scarfo's fall, Sicilian-born boss John Stanfa attempts to restore order. However, he faced rebellion from younger South Philadelphia members led by Joey Merlino, and that clash represented more than a power struggle. It was generational and a cultural issue. The Stanfa faction had a traditional hierarchy. They had loyalty to old world mafia customs, and they had a reliance on imported Sicilian loyalists, whereas the Merlino side of things, they were younger and they were street raised. They were strong neighborhood loyalties. They had loyalty in the neighborhood nobody else did, and willingness to challenge authority. And that resulting war in the early 90s involved assassination attempts, public shootouts, and betrayals. Stanfa was eventually imprisoned, and Merlino's faction emerged to be the dominant group. And that conflict demonstrates how street politics, friendships formed on neighborhood corners rather than formal mafia ranks, could reshape an organized crime family's leadership. Excuse me, coffee. Then we look at the informant boss, Ralph Natale. Natale briefly became boss in the 1990s in name only, but soon turned government witness, becoming the first sitting mafia boss in U.S. history to testify against his own organization. His cooperation, devastated the family structure and exposed numerous crimes. Natale's tenure highlights a critical failure pattern in organized crime leadership. Weak authority leads to reliance on government deals. Leaders lacking loyalty networks cannot survive prosecution pressure. And informants can dismantle organizations faster than rival gangs could. Then they had the quiet reconstruction, or what I like to call the resurrection. And that was brought apart in part by Joe Lagambi. Because following years of all of that chaos, Joe Lagambi presided over a quiet era. Unlike Nicky Scarfo, he avoided violence and he avoided public attention, focusing on low-profile rackets and minimizing conflict. Although law enforcement still targeted the organization, his leadership restored relative stability. And Lagambi's approach reflected lessons learned from past failures. Violence invites prosecution. Public notoriety is insanely dangerous, and stability is more profitable than domination. And so the Philadelphia Mafia has always been uniquely shaped by neighborhood dynamics. Unlike large crime families with vast territories, Philadelphia's organization operated in dense urban communities where everybody knew one another. And that environment created several structural realities. Okay, number one, personal relationships mattered more than rank. Two, neighborhood loyalty could override mafia hierarchy. That's a big one. Street reputation influenced leadership legitimacy. Number 4, conflicts escalated quickly due to proximity. And those factors explain why Philadelphia experienced more internal wars than many of the other crime families we talk about on this show. When disputes arose, rivals often lived only blocks apart from one another, making retaliation immediate and escalation inevitable. And so what are the patterns of successful versus failed bosses? Well, a successful boss was diplomatic. He was low profile. He was strategic. He had loyal networks, controlled violence. Think Joe Lagambi, Angelo Bruno. Failed boss traits like Nicky Scarfo and Stampa: paranoid, flashy, impulsive, isolated leadership, and excessive violence. Merlino can go on the failed boss traits too. And so the Philadelphia underworld repeatedly demonstrates that the mafia leaders fall not simply because of war or enforcement, but because poor internal management. And so the history of organized crime in Philadelphia is really a case study in how leadership style determines criminal longevity. Strong bosses like Angelo Bruno and Joe Lagambi prioritize stability, discretion, and alliances, enabling their regimes to last. Failed bosses such as Scarfo, Natale, and Merlino relied on fear, violence, or self-interest, which all that did was accelerate collapse. But above all else, the Philadelphia Mafia illustrates that organized crime is not merely a hierarchy. It's a living political system shaped by personalities, loyalties, and neighborhood culture. Internal wars, betrayals, and shifting alliances are not anomalies, but defining characteristics. So in South Philly, the greatest threat to a crime boss has rarely been the police or the FBI or investigations. It's almost always been their own people. That is the big black sheep of the Philadelphia Mafia. But let's look at some timelines just so that we can encapsulate the whole entire thesis here. So, timeline of bosses in major wars of the Philadelphia Mafia. Early era, from the 1910s to 1959, they had formation and consolidation, right? Salvatore Sabella, 1911 to 1914, earliest recognized boss, established Sicilian subculture. John Avena, 1914 to 1936, oversaw growth during Prohibition. Joe Bruno, 1936 to 1959, he was a transitional leader who kept the peace but never achieved national prominence, meaning he was only big in Philadelphia. The major conflicts in those days: bootlegging and turf disputes during Prohibition, and ethnic gang clashes between the Irish, Jewish, and Italian factions competing for rackets. Then you have what we call the golden age of stability in Philly, from 1959 to 1980. Angelo Bruno, 59 to 80, widely regarded as the most successful Philadelphia boss, avoided violence, built alliances, and expanded gambling operations. The major events were the Atlantic City expansion era of the 70s and the strong commission relations that Bruno had with Gambino and other people. However, in 1980, Bruno gets clipped outside of his house, and that is a turning point that shattered stability within the South Philadelphia Mafia. Then you have violent power struggles from 1980 to 1990. Phil Testa, 80 to 81. He's the Bruno successor, assassinated by a nail bomb. Nicky Scarfo, 81 to 91. Ruthless regime marked by paranoia and nonstop murder. Major war, the Scarfo purge period. Dozens of internal killings, targeted perceived disloyal members. Think of the Riccoboni faction. And the result of all of that was FBI attention skyrocketed, leading to indictments and the collapse of leadership. From 1990 to 1996, you have what I like to call the Civil War era. John Stampa, 90 to 95, Sicilian traditionalist, rival faction led by Joey Merlino. The major war, Stampa-Merlino War from 92 to 94, shootings in public streets, attempted assassinations, and generational split. Basically, old world versus street-raised members. And the outcome, Stampa gets imprisoned, Merlino faction takes over. Then you have what we like to call the informant shock era. And this went on from 1994 to the year 2000. Ralph Natale, 94 to 99, front boss who was aligned with Merlino, turns government witness, first sitting mafia boss to testify for the prosecution. And the impact that had was dozens of convictions, right? Organizational structure was severely weakened, and reputation was damaged in mob circles. Then you have what we like to call the low-profile reconstruction. And that took place between 2000 and 2026. Joey Merlino, street boss influence from 99 to about 2005. Although he was in prison periodically, he had remained influential until the last year or so. Joe Lagambi, acting boss from 99 to 2014, stabilized operations and had a very quiet and reserved leadership style. And the recent pattern that we've seen in Philadelphia is smaller crews, less violence, and they're focusing more on gambling, loans, and fraud rather than the murders that we saw. So what are the major Philadelphia wars? Just a quick list. Well, Scarfo purges from 81 to 87, and the cause was paranoia and consolidation, and the result was the family gets weakened. 92 to 94, Stamfa versus Merlino, generational rebellion. Merlino faction wins that. Post-Natali fallout from 99 to 2002, the cause was informant testimony, and the result was organizational collapse. The modern internal tensions, 2010s, and the cause was power sharing disputes. And the result of that was fragmented structures. So if we look at a comparison chart, I told you I was going to bring it today, guys and ladies. Comparison chart, Philadelphia versus New York Mafia leadership styles. I think it's important to kind of look at the differences here so that you get a better grip of what we're dealing with. So what we have here is the trait, and then you have how Philadelphia dealt with it and New York. So in terms of structure, Philadelphia is smaller and looser compared to the New York five families who are highly structured. When you look at the violence level of Philadelphia, historically high. With New York, it's usually controlled to some degree. When you look at internal wars, Philadelphia had them frequently. New York rarely had them. When you look at leadership stability, Philadelphia is often unstable. New York, long-term bosses were a common thing. When it comes to decision-making, Philadelphia is very personality-driven. They always have been, whereas New York is committee and administration-driven. When you look at the street influence, Philadelphia has massive, strong neighborhood control, something that I just don't think people understand, whereas New York has broader regional influence. Law enforcement pressure, when it comes to Philadelphia, it's high due to the overwhelming violence they've had in their history, whereas New York has always sort of managed that through discipline. And so when we look at New York's model sort of reference, the New York system is represented by the five families, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo. And the key contrast here would be New York families historically emphasize bureaucracy and a chain of command, whereas Philadelphia, by contrast, has always sort of functioned like a hybrid between a mafia family and a street gang network, where personal loyalties outweigh formal rank. That's the way Philadelphia has always been. And so when you look at sort of the analytical conclusion of all of this, the truth of the matter is the Philadelphia underworld's history shows a very repeating cycle that just doesn't seem to stop. And that is strong boss, assassination, violent successor, indictments, collapse, quiet rebuild. And this has been going on in Philadelphia for 50 years. A strong boss gets assassinated, a violent successor comes in, they get indicted, go to jail, the whole thing fucking collapses, and then someone new steps in and they try to rebuild. And that pattern rarely appears in New York because its families developed institutional safeguards, ruling panels, acting bosses, and insulated leadership layers that prevent sudden power vacuums. That's been sort of Philadelphia's Achilles heel, is everybody wants to be boss. And the Philadelphia mob, shaped heavily by neighborhood street politics, has remained more volatile. It's a story that's less about stable criminal empires and more about survival through constant internal pressure. And so who are some of the most feared mob figures in Philadelphia history ranked? This is no particular order, just a list. And the criteria that I used for this was reputation for violence, command authority, and psychological intimidation, a number of sanctioned hits, and testimony from law enforcement informants. So we used a whole bunch of things here. And number one is Nicky Scarfo, widely considered the most Philadelphia mafia boss ever, ordered numerous murders during his reign in 10 years from 81 to 91. He ruled truly through paranoia. Even longtime allies feared to be executed by him, and created a culture where loyalty was based on terror rather than respect. And this is why everybody dimed him out. I told you, Nicky Scarfo and Joey Merlino made more rats in that crime family than anybody else. And it's true. Number 2, Harry Riccobene, independent power broker known as the Hunchback, survived assassination attempts and refused to submit to Scarfo. Personally ordered hits and maintained his own loyal faction. Number 3, Joey Merlino, feared for unpredictability and boldness, led a younger faction that openly challenged leadership and survived multiple assassination attempts and federal prosecutions. Phil Testa, known as the Chicken Man. Number 4, commanded respect as Bruno's enforcer before becoming boss, and his murder shocked the underworld because few thought anybody would dare target him. Number 5, Salvi Testa, son of Phil Testa, one of the most feared soldiers ever, personally participated in multiple murders, nicknamed the Crown Prince of the Mafia, before being betrayed and killed. 6, John Staffa, old world Sicilian boss known for cold, calculated retaliation, ordered hits during the 90s Civil War. Angelo Bruno, less violent than others, but feared because of his absolute authority. His calm demeanor masked total control over the organization. Number 8, Chicky Cingolini, notorious street enforcer, reputation for violence and willingness to act without hesitation. And so what's the breakdown of the deadliest mob hits in Philadelphia history? Because this is all part of politics too. Angelo Bruno, whacked in 1980, shot in his car outside of his home. Why deadly historically? Well, because it triggered decades of instability and wars in Philadelphia, and the impact was it ended the most peaceful era that the Philadelphia mob ever had. Number 2, the Philip Testa nail bomb, 1981. Method: bomb put under the porch, detonated when he opened the door. Significance: one of the most dramatic mafia assassinations in the United States history. The effect sparked a violent succession battle, leading to Nicky Scarfo's rise. 1984, the Salvi Testa execution. Method: lured to a meeting and shot. Reason: internal jealousy and fear over his popularity. Impact: demonstrated Scarfo's paranoia and willingness to kill allies. The Riccobene War murders, 82 to 84. The conflict: Scarfo faction versus the Riccobene loyalists. Body count: multiple gangland killings across South Philadelphia. The importance was that cemented Scarfo's dominance but drew federal attention. 5, the Staffa Merlino War shootings, 92 to 94. Nature: public gun battles and attempted hits. Notable incident: drive-by attempt on Merlino outside of a social club. Impact: proved the family had developed into street gang-style warfare. The hit on Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso. Reason: suspected disloyalty. Message: reinforced the suspicion alone could be a death sentence. And the pattern seen across Philadelphia mob violence is crazy, because across decades, deadly hits in Philadelphia tend to share 3 very similar traits. Bet Jeff Nadeau ain't doing this shit. And those 3 traits were internal betrayal. Most murders targeted members, not rivals. Leadership insecurity. Violent bosses ordered more killings. And number 3, power transitions. Nearly every assassination followed a leadership change or a leadership shift. And that differs from larger organized crime families where murders are typically strategic and rare. In Philadelphia, killings often reflected personal issues, personal grudges, paranoia, or street politics rather than calculated organizational strategies. And so what is the smartest and yet most reckless and deadliest hit timeline in Philadelphia? Because it's all over the place. And I think this encapsulates sort of the schizophrenia of the Philadelphia Mafia. So let's go to the smartest Philadelphia mob figures ranked. Number 1, Angelo Bruno, master strategist who ruled for 2 decades, avoiding violence and keeping strong national alliances. He understood that quiet profits beat flashy power. Number 2, Joe Lagambi, rebuilt the organization after chaos, used low-profile rackets and minimized law enforcement attention. Textbook survival, leadership 101. Number 3, which is a controversial pick, Ralph Natale, strategically saved himself by cooperating with the authorities, morally condemned mob culture, but undeniably tactically smart. He's a bum and a fucking rat, but think about it. I mean, it's kind of a smart move, especially if you don't want to go to jail. Nicodemo Scarfo, brilliant tactician in the short term, rose quickly and eliminated rivals efficiently, but his long-term strategy was a fucking disaster. Number 5, Harry Riccobene, independent operator who resisted multiple bosses and survived longer than most challengers. So what's the most reckless mobsters ranked? Number 1, Salvi Testa, feared hitman whose rising popularity threatened leadership, bold, violent, and openly ambitious. Number 2, Joey Merlino, charismatic but flashy, public appearances, media attention, and visible lifestyle always brought scrutiny. Number 3, Phil Testa, accepted leadership during unstable times without consolidating power first, a fatal miscalculation. Number 4, John Stanfa, imported loyalists from Sicily and underestimated local street factions, sparking a civil war. Number 5, Chicky Cingolini, street enforcer known for impulsive violence and willingness to escalate efforts, are willing to escalate conflicts quickly. So I'm going to give you the timeline and locations of major mob hits in Philadelphia, too. You ready for this? 1980, Bruno assassination, a location outside of his home in South Philly. Method, shot, and car. Effect trigger 15 years of wars and instability. 81, test a nail bomb, location, his front porch, South Philadelphia row house block. Method, pressure trigger bomb. Significance, one of the most shocking mafia murders ever showed that leadership was not safe. 82 to 84, the Riccaboni war hits. Location, various South Philly intersections and social clubs. Pattern, retaliatory street shootings. Impact, established Scarfo dominance, but attracted nothing but federal task forces. 84, Salvi test to execution. Location, lured to a meeting spot in South Philadelphia. Reason, leadership feared his growing popularity. Meaning, demonstrated paranoia inside of leadership ranks. 93, Civil War shootings. Conflict, Stanfa versus Merlino. Hotspots, Columbus Boulevard, Snyder Avenue, South Philadelphia social club. Significance, public shootouts showed the family had lost internal discipline. 2000s, post-war cleanups. Fewer murders, violence replaced by indictments, and organized crime shifted to financial schemes rather than killings. And so what's the pattern analysis? Well, what does this all tell us? Well, there are 3 consistent things and 3 consistent truths that emerge from all of this. Number 1, intelligence prolongs power. The smartest bosses ruled the longest, died the least violently. Number 2, recklessness shortened careers. Flashy or impulsive figures were usually imprisoned or murdered. And number 3, most killings were internal. Unlike street gangs, the majority of mob hits targeted their own members, not rivals. And so what about the betrayal power chart? Who turned on who? Well, Angelo Bruno's betrayed by Antonio Caponegro, who ordered the assassination hoping to seize power. Antonio Caponegro is then killed by New York bosses for an unauthorized hit. Phil Testa was betrayed by Frank Narducci, allegedly. I have issues with that. I always have, and we've talked about that on the Philadelphia show. I'm not going to go through that here, but he was one of the guys mentioned. Nicodemo Scarfo is betrayed by multiple captains and informants, and that leads to federal indictments. Salvi Testa was betrayed by Nicky Scarfo and his loyalists who feared his popularity. John Stanfa was betrayed by younger street factions led by Joey Merlino. Ralph Natali was betrayed by the entire crime family, turned government witness, and that triggered convictions. And so what's the pattern there? Well, Philadelphia's underworld isn't destroyed by outside enemies. It historically collapses from internal betrayal. Cycles every time leadership changes. And if you look at the mob family tree of factions, nobody else is doing this either. Early Sicilian founders, Bruno-era loyalists, followed by traditionalists and political fixers. The Scarfo faction had hit squad loyalists and paranoid inner circle. The Riccaboni independent crew were anti-Scarfo rebels. Stanfa Sicilian faction imported loyalists because he couldn't get it from the streets of South Philadelphia. Joey Merlino, street faction, South Philly crews, younger earners, and social club-based networks. And so what's the structural insight here? Well, Philadelphia is different from larger syndicates because factions formed around neighborhood ties, childhood friendships, prison alliances, family bloodlines, and not specific by rank. And that's why wars happen so often. Loyalty to a person outweighed loyalty to the organization. I'll say it again, because if you are ever going to write anything about the South Philadelphia mob and why they've been a failure, it's this. Loyalty to a person outweighs loyalty to the organization. That's the biggest fucking problem. And so, because I want to just cover as much as I can, I wasn't going to do this part, but I will. But criminologists who have studied organized crime, often categorize mafia leaders into reoccurring personality archetypes, right? And Philadelphia is one of the organized crime groups that has seen nearly every fucking type there is. You have the diplomat boss. The traits would be calm, patient, politically connected. Strength, long reign, weakness, vulnerable to ambitious subordinates. Think Angelo Bruno. And these bosses build empires quietly and are rarely targeted until the rivals grow impatient. The tyrant boss, traits, paranoid, violent, authoritarian, strength short-term, control through fear, weakness, betrayal, and informants. And their role usually ends in prison or assassination because fear destroys loyalty. Think of Nicky Scarfo. Then you have the street boss, charismatic, flashy, loyal to neighborhood allies, strong grassroots support. The weakness attracts law enforcement attention. Street bosses rise fast but rarely maintain stable empires. Think Joey Merlino. The survivor boss, traits, cautious, adaptable, low profile, strength, longevity, weakness, limited power, expansion. These leaders focus on survival instead of dominance, and they're often underestimated, but they do last the longest. Then you have the puppet boss. Think Ralph Natali here, right? Figurehead controlled by everybody else. Strength shields real leaders from prosecution. Weakness disposable. Philadelphia has used that model more than any other model in existence. And so the core role of Philadelphia organized crime. Across more than a century, there is one consistent thing that comes out. Philadelphia Mafia falls not because of enemies, but because of unchecked ambition inside of its own ranks. And larger syndicates hierarchy protects leadership, right? And Philadelphia personality drives that power. It makes the organization more volatile, more violent internally, more prone to coups, but it also makes it more resilient after the collapse. And it behaves less like a corporation and more like a constantly shifting street alliance. So I've gone above and beyond today. So I'm going to give you the top 50 Philadelphia mob figures of all time, not ranked in any particular order. Okay? Tier 1, you have 5. And these are legendary power brokers. Angelo Bruno, Nicky Scarfo, Joey Merlino, Joe Lagambi, John Stamfa. Tier 2 would be powerful bosses and challengers. Phil Testa, Harry Riccobene, Salvatore Sabella, John Avena, Ralph Natali. Tier 3, elite enforcers and captains. Salvi Testa, Lawrence Merlino, Chucky Merlino, Antonio Caponegro, Frank Narducci. You have Tier 4, influential administration figures. Frank Sindone, Pete Casella, Philly Anetti, Salvatore Merlino, Joe Cingolini Sr. Tier 5, street commanders. Chicky Cingolini, Michael Cingolini, Gaetan Lucibello, Frank Monti, Pasquale Martirano. Tier 6, earners and strategic operators. Frank Palumbo, Joe Ida, Domenico Oliveto, Ignazio Denaro, Antonio Polina. Tier 7, modern influencers. Stevie Mazzone, Giorgi Borghese, Dominic Grande, Mikey Lancelotti, Anthony Nicodemo. Tier 8, influential associates. Ronald Turchi, Ralph Stano, Nicky the Blade, Virgilio, Joe Sedano, and Anthony Stano. I know, do you guys realize I know that 90% of these people on this list? Tier 9, historical influences and power brokers. Vito Genovese influenced Philly politics externally. Carlo Gambino, commission influence. Frank Costello, national political ties. Tommy Lucchese, commission ally. Russell Buffalino, Pennsylvania power broker. Tier 10, notorious names. Nicky Scarfo Jr., the Martirano family. Joe Pungatori, Anthony Piccolo, and Frank Sindone Jr. It's just crazy. Just crazy. So we're going to do the Philadelphia Mafia Who Killed Who chart. And the reason why we're doing this is because this has a lot to do with politics. Remember, this is about neighborhood bullshit. Angelo Bruno was killed by ordered and killed by Antonio Caponegro, ordered by himself, possibly encouraged by mob rivals. That happened in 1980. Bruno assassinated outside of his home. Caponegro killed by the commission for an unauthorized hit. Phil Testa, Frank Narducci allegedly used a nail bomb, and it was revenge ambition, and took power after Bruno, and that was in 81. Salvi Testa, 84, was killed by Scarfo loyalists. Scarfo feared Salvi's popularity and independence. 82 to 84, we have the Harry Riccobene loyalists. Scarfo hit squads were killed. They were the ones that were after him. Internal war for Scarfo consolidation. Frank Narducci Jr. Was killed and ordered by the Scarfo faction, and the reason was for a purge of opposition forces. Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso was killed and ordered. The killing was ordered by a Scarfo hit squad. 1980s, suspected disloyalty. Antonio Capernigo, Anthony Tony Caponegro, unknown mob retaliation, 1980, punished for killing Bruno without approval. Frank Monte was assassinated by the Riccaboni crew in 1970, gang war retaliation. Salvatore Cingolini was killed by a rival street crew, and it was a local feud in 91. John Stampa faction was killed or ordered by the Merlino faction to go away. That was from 92 to 94, civil war between the old guard and the younger faction. Then there's attempted hits on Joey Merlino by the Stampa loyalists in 93, which led to civil war retaliation. Then you have Ralph Natale's enemies. Went after him. He cooperates with law enforcement in 99. Multiple convictions and no street murders. Then there was multiple Scarfo-era soldiers were killed by Scarfo or on the orders of Scarfo. From 81 to 87, paranoia executions, dozens killed internally. Pasquale Maturano was killed by a rival crew. In 75, that feud would only escalate. Chicky Cingolini, they went after him. Just gang violence. Phil Testa, associates, several internal Scarfo faction. From 81 to 83, consolidation of power. Merlino era rivals. Joey Merlino faction did it in the 1990s. Old guard street faction wars. So, observations from the who killed who chart that we can make. Well, internal betrayal dominates. Most victims were killed by their own bosses or factions, not rivals or rival cities. They're killing each other. Number two, power transitions are fucking deadly. Every assassination aligns with leadership vacuum or succession attempt. Bruno to Testa to Scarfo. Number three, paranoia kills faster than enemies. Scarfo era shows dozens executed for perceived but not real disloyalty. Number four, street politics matter. Civil wars, Merlino versus Stampa, were fought in neighborhoods and social clubs, not just secretive mob hits. And so it all comes down to what Anthony wanted to know about, the street politics. And one of the more interesting questions that I do get about Philadelphia, to round all of this out, is how street politics play an effect on the temperature in Philadelphia. And a large part of Philadelphia's problem has always been the backbiting of the rank and file. And a quick example, more so because it's not very complicated, is this. George Borghese goes off to prison for over a decade with Joey and everybody else. And in his absence, his rackets allegedly were handed off to Marty Angelina, who also pushed further into Delaware. So when Georgie gets out of prison, he wants his rackets back. Now, whether George approached Marty about that issue or not, I'm not 100% sure of. But knowing Georgie the way that I do, Georgie is not a bellyacre. So I can imagine he was pretty fucking direct about what he wanted. And Angelina, on his behalf, refused to give him back. And maybe there's an argument that Angelina was funneling more money back to Joey than George was. And I tend to believe that because it's been said when Georgie asked for the rackets back, both Angelina and Merlino said no. And that caused a rift in the family. And it's been alleged, once again, I say alleged, that Georgie asked for Marty Angelina's head on a fucking platter and was told no. And after that, Georgie ends up getting demoted and is in the doghouse for a couple of years, which was reported by the press and law enforcement, et cetera. And it took him a couple of years to get back into the good graces of Joey. And that's typical of Joey Merlino and how he ran his family. It's an ongoing story and a narrative. And it's not just guys like Georgie, it's other guys. And while we understand protocol enough to understand you go away, guys are going to absorb whatever you have. You come out, you got to start up again. But there was some real pissant shit that went on because of this certain issue. And it could have led to another war, but thankfully it didn't. And this is the type of issue that creates havoc all over South Philadelphia. Another example would be guys who didn't recognize Joey as boss. Look at former Scarfo era guys like Mousy. I can't mention that other guy's name. I'll mention Mousy, but I can't mention other names because it's just start shit. But they never recognized Joey as boss. And those are just the facts. So there essentially has been three factions in Philadelphia for 30 fucking years. You have Joey's side of the fence, which would include many of his childhood buddies who we've talked about. Then you have the Scarfo era guys who all start getting out around the same time after long, heavy prison sentences. And they don't align with Joey. But they also haven't muddied the water either. And you have to understand a lot of these Scarfo era guys did huge stretches. And the guys that they met in federal and state prison only benefited them once they returned to the streets. And it means they exited with contacts and friendships with powerful people, something I don't think Joey accounted for, mainly because he's too busy buying clothes and smiling for cameras like a fucking idiot. Then a third faction, the 10th and O crew, does not kick up to Joey. They don't kick up to him. There are several guys in Philadelphia that refused to kick up to Joey, and he did nothing. How powerful of a boss can you be if guys tell you, fuck off, I'm not kicking up. What the fuck are you going to do? That tells you they don't fear him. So how strong can you be as a boss when your own men tell you to fuck off both privately and publicly, and you do jack shit? And it's more a sign of the times, or perhaps the intelligence of Merlino to just, I don't know, not create fucking waves. But Joey creates waves everywhere he goes because he needs to be surrounded by yes men and lackeys. And that's the biggest problem, is there is this fawning, this preening, this almost cult-like symptom down there. You look in terms of longevity. Did Joey have a great run? 30 years. Absolutely. But half of that was spent in the fucking can. And the reality is, when he was in the can, Joe Lagambi ran that crime family expertly. It doesn't get any better than Joe Lagambi. It just doesn't. And that's what I mean about these street politics. I've never given a fuck about anybody's rank in Philadelphia. They'll all tell you that too. I didn't give a fuck what your title is. You bleed like everybody else. If I like somebody, I give them their respect. But in Philadelphia, this is the difference. In New York, a captain carries weight. He carries respect. You respect a capo in New York City. In Philadelphia, it's different. There could be a guy that's a captain and very violent and powerful, but if people don't like him, fuck him. That's their mentality down there. And I think the problem is Philadelphia is such a centrally small area that everybody knows everything. That's a problem. But I'm going to tell you something a lot of people don't know. Joey has to go to every bar. Joey had to go to every event. A lot of these guys do that. But there is a certain select group of 5 guys down there that do not do this. They will not go where Joey's going to. They're smart. They stay away from it because they know it's a lightning rod for nonsense. And that's the biggest problem of Philadelphia. Philly's biggest problem is Philly. Everybody wants to be boss, but nobody can ignore the crickets. And that's the problem. But I think we have turned a corner because everything street politics down there wise is not based on the bottom line, which is organized crime. It's based on guys' individual thought processes, who they're friends with. Guys will beef and shoot each other over nothing down there. But I do think we've turned a corner. I think we have 100% turned a corner. I think things are different there, but they cannot fall into the same trappings that everybody else has. And until we get somebody down there that completely recognizes all of that, which I think there's a couple that do, and then put that into action and put that into force and mean it. And then there's retaliation if people don't get in line. That's how Philadelphia regains a foothold. But it comes with a caveat, and that caveat is law enforcement pressure. You know what I mean? So that's how street politics works in Philadelphia. Not necessarily the bottom line for what's good for organized crime, but what's good for guys personally in their friendships. Because I'm going to tell you something. Rank means something, but it means very little because of the friendships they have with certain people. Which is why even if I knew I was right, say, let's pretend I had a beef. Even if I was right in the beef, guys won't back me. Not because they're not siding with me, but because their friendship is deeper rooted with someone else than me. And that's okay, but that's not how you run an organized crime family. Straight up and down the line. You know? So I hope you guys got something out of this today. Everything down there is, like I said, led by politics. Who do you back? Who do you not back? You know? And it's funny because a lot of people there will kiss Joey's ass in front of him, and then as soon as he walks away, they'll be like, he's a fucking prick. Those guys would eat his fucking eyes out of his goddamn head if they had to. Because at the end of the day, let's remember something. You can be friends with somebody 40 fucking years, okay? But if somebody comes to you and gives you the gold watch and says, you're in control now, you're in control of everything, believe me, it won't take much for that friendship to turn into a bitter fucking war very quickly. And I'm going to tell you something. The only thing that could ever undo Joey Merlino is his own guys. And they undid him. They got him the fuck out. You know? And there was a lot of placating and a lot of game playing going on when that happened. And the worst part is I knew about all of it and I couldn't say shit. Because I don't get, you know, I just can't do it. But everything I've told you guys that would happen, happened. I am the only one in the mob genre on earth that told you A, B, C, and D would happen. And I was 100% right. Now, my haters will say, oh, he just guessed and got it right. No, maybe it's because I know people and I'm around and I know what the temperature is. I knew what the temperature was before because I go right back to a phone call I had with people I'm not going to name from Philadelphia. We don't like him doing a podcast. It's going to create all this shit. We don't agree with it. It's fucking bullshit. But what can we do? And that's been the problem. The problem isn't a guy grabbing a gun and killing Joey over doing this. The problem is there are people that support him unwaveringly, stupidly so, that even if they wanted to kill Joey, they can't. Because the reverberation and the cause and effect and the retaliation after that will be severe. Not just from law enforcement, but from the fucking cult-like bozos that follow him. They ought to make Snuff do it. Give Snuff a 38 and say, he's got to go where you're going. Wouldn't that be hilarious? But that's the way this is going to end. You're going to wake up one morning and one of two things is going to happen. Merlino indicted will spend the rest of his life in prison or they're going to fucking kill him. I'm telling you. Mark my words. All right. With all that being said, I hope you got something out of this today. I hope you learned something. Give me some feedback. Shoot me an email at mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com and let me know what you think. In the meantime, stay dry. It's going to be a little rainy. More fucking snow coming to New York. And we'll see everybody either tonight at 7:05 or I'll do it tomorrow night. I'm going to make that decision here in the next 10 minutes. So check our Facebook, Mob Talk Radio Show, or check our YouTube community post for that information. In the meantime, maybe we can talk about this tonight. Talk to everybody later.